For my Rockler Try That challenge, I was working on a 3D relief logo of a football team, LA Rams, for a fan that's a friend that is going to get this as a Christmas gift. I've got a few things that I'm trying new. I've never really done a relief like this using plywood or other woods. It's kind of basically paint it up and then stick it together in a relief. I'm also cutting the two pieces of the A at the same time using the bandsaw. I've never really done that before. I know it's a pretty common thing, but I've never done it. And I'm using the keyhole jig for the mounting. I made the jig a few years ago, and I've never really used it for a project. I made it in hopes I would be able to use it on a project, and so this is the first one. And so we started then with this project at the drawing board or Photoshop, and I got a copy of the logo. I wanted really thick lines so that I could have some gaps in between the parts of it as I cut it out. Made a little X's to make sure I knew where to cut it up later on, and then I used the laser engraver to engrave that onto the wood so that I wasn't doing transfers or anything like that. It was just already laser engraved on the wood. Then the next thing was to use the tape up to put the two pieces of wood together. These are two pieces of plywood so that I can cut out the two parts, so I've got that 3D relief going, and that will be very useful in keeping it together as I'm cutting it with the bandsaw. Now, once I was cutting it out, I was going to be cutting out on the inside of the large lines. That way I could have that gap. I did want to cut out the L and the horn that went with the L all as one piece, and then the A is one piece, and then I would cut out part of the ram's horn that's behind the L so that the L would stand up. And so the idea is the ram's horn would be one layer, the L would be higher, and it'd be the same level as the A, which would actually stand up higher off of the plaque itself. Part of the challenge of this, of course, was getting it to cut through all the curves and to cut out all the right parts and make sure that I got the right cut on the inside of the wider lines. But taping the two boards together worked great. I'll do this technique again. I thought about using some kind of a slight glue. I've seen other people do that, but this tape up worked great, and the painter's tape came right off with no issues whatsoever. Now, once I got done with the main part, I was cutting out this section with both boards. When I finished up with the L and the horn there, then they came apart, obviously because they weren't taped together anymore, which is great because then I needed to make the next step, which was cut the L out separately. And this is what it looked like once it was together, so that I could have kind of a matchup to make sure it worked like it was supposed to. Then we kind of got into the start of the glue up, and I used wood glue on the two pieces of the A. I first had to choose which one would be better for the top, and it actually was the bottom one that was better for the top based on the way the cut came out. And of course I had to sand them down some, and then I would sand them down again after this glue up. One of the challenges was, because it was plywood, the tip of that horn didn't come out really well. I had to kind of cut it off a little bit and round it over, but it worked out okay. I used tape to hold this together for the glue up time because I thought it would work better than a clamp for as far as not letting things move around. It came out great. I'm not sure it was worth the hassle, and that I shouldn't have just used the clamp to do it. Probably a couple of spring clamps would have worked fine. Then I sprayed it with a primer, and the primer was a white primer, and it was paint and primer together, and so that gave it a good bright white for the L and the A. And then I used this craft glue in a lemon color for the yellow parts. The yellow parts were kind of interesting. It was basically the full horn underneath the L. You can see how I shaped it there, and there's the white L on the back. It's going to lay on top. And then, of course, the A, part of it is yellow, and I tried to feather it. I didn't do a lot of feathering, just a little bit of feathering. It wasn't a hard line between the yellow and the white. I kind of let it just kind of fade out very quickly. Now once the engraving was going on, while it was going on, I had to prepare the back and let the plaque part. I had these boards left over from a previous project, and it was the boards were 1 inch, not 3/4 like most 1 inch boards are, but an actual 1 inch thick and about 2.5 inches wide, and 4 of them glued up together. And so I cut off a section of about 11 inches and then used the table saw and the fence in the table saw and the miter gauge on the table saw to try to get a good square and to square it up to where we had a really good rectangle there. And of course I had printed a copy of the logo too before I started, so I could check it for sizing to make sure the sizing was going to work the way I wanted it to. And then of course the boards were not planed before I started, so I used my hand planer to smooth out and try to get everything about the same thickness, mainly working with the fact that the boards weren't exactly matched up, and I'd use the hand planer, electric planer, to do that. And then of course sanding, lots of sanding to try to get it as flat as possible before I took it to the router table. Obviously I'm not showing all the sanding that was here because that would be a really long amount of sanding. Then we took it to the router table and I put a small curved edge to take off the main edge on one side, left the other side square because it would be going against the wall, and then take it back to go more sanding to try to smooth that out. Then I used my keyhole jig, and like I said, I built the keyhole jig a couple years ago, but basically I needed to use a couple of spacers, and those are pieces of plywood that are about they are 1.25 inches each. So I put about 3 inches over so that my keyhole would go to the right spot. That's kind of what was expected when I built the jig, that I would use spacers to make sure it's in the right spot on the board when I did it. Then use my plunge router to go down and make the keyhole. I wish I could say it was perfect, but first time I did it upside down, and so that side became the bottom, and I redid it near the top like I wanted it the first time, and it worked really well. And then at that point I used a navy stain, wood stain, on the wood itself for the plaque. I figured it would come out really nice. It's extremely thick, but it's a good stain, and I just put it on with paper towel and just try to make sure it was smooth so I could still see the wood grain, and I think it came out pretty good. Then came the hard part of the glue up, and I used an acid brush to make sure that the wood glue was extremely thin so I wouldn't have a lot of squeeze out whenever I was putting the parts together. The first one I put together was the horn with the L on it. I'm using a small piece of, that's actually another project that is not complete, but the part was nice and square, and so I kind of used it to help me line it up properly, eyeballing it as much as using the measurement, and then I pressed it down and held it in place for a few seconds. This is actually at a higher speed. I'm not that quick at doing this, but then I'd wipe out all the excess glue out. I didn't have as much excess glue out on the other pieces, which is a good thing because there wasn't as much room to wipe out. But after I did that piece, I then did the L, which is white, to lay on top of that horn and glued it in place. Once again, using the acid brush to keep the glue kind of thin so it didn't have a lot of squeeze out. And just measured that up to make sure it lined up with the other L and held it in place for a couple of seconds. And then did the same thing with the A. Now the A, remember, it was glued up 2 pieces before, and so now it's just going to be glued up like this. The bottom part's being glued up after all the painting's done, and it'll just be laid in place and lined up with the appropriate gaps. And then we took then I took another piece of plywood, basically another piece of plywood just like what I cut the letters out of, and I laid it on top of it to get us a good balance, and then used weight. 100 rounds of buckshot made a really good weight for it, and then let it sit for about an hour. Pulled off the top, pulled off the buckshot, and everything appeared to be quite solid in place. Verified it was all lined up properly, and then I waited a while before I moved on to the last step. The last step was to add this matte, clear spray paint from Rust-Oleum over the top. It would help keep the craft paint from peeling over time. But since it's matte, it doesn't really add any extra sheen or shine or something I didn't want on it. And after that, I let it set for a couple hours and dry, and it is all completed. But one of the interesting things that came out of this was the relief came out really nice. I think everything came out pretty cool, and I really hope he likes it when I give it to him for Christmas.